The name of this particular talk is Raising Patriots, because a few years ago the GOP asked me to go around and speak to parents about the importance of saving America and what did we need to do to save America. And so really the talk is geared towards who you want to raise up. And so one of the important things for us in the future is to save our nation. And so the title reflects that to be able to save our nation, we need to leave and press upon our children a patriotic mind. But for those of us that are Christians, we are raising great Christians for tomorrow. For those of us who have values, we are raising moral men and women for tomorrow. We are leaving the greatest gift to the world and to our Lord in our children. And it is my understanding that because we don't really do this deliberately, we are decaying as a culture. And that's where we need to be very cognizant of the fact that one of the most important jobs that we have as human beings is to raise our children and to raise them in who we are. And who we are is somebody very individual. It's not the person down the street. It's not J-Lo on the TV. It's who God has impressed you to be, and that is what that's the greatest treasure, the greatest thing that you leave behind in your children. And so I've had an experience base and a life that has been very varied, and that's what's allowed me to be able to speak with in so many different areas. And as you go through today and you look at the different places that I might be, what I want to leave with you is that raising children is the parent and especially the mom. But you're also impressing on that child what we call education. And you're building the child one block at a time. All of these things come together. And so you have here what a mom does, and the next one what the education will do. And the last one that I'm speaking to adults is about practical points, and I hope to be able to impress on you how do you put into action what I'm talking about so that you can take it back into your homes and actually make a difference in the future of your children. And so if you want to continue to follow me after this, I have a radio show. One is local to us. We're from North Carolina, right the center. We're sort of the Omaha of North Carolina. So we're right in the center of North Carolina. And you know, when you're in the center of a country or the state, the culture is really coming from you. So that's why you're getting so bombarded in Omaha with such liberal, progressive ideas. They know that if they bring you down, they're going to bring down the rest of the country because you are the heart. We feel that very strongly in Burlington, North Carolina. Our schools are leaning very heavily, and our college is leaning very heavily in progressive ideas. It's because they want to change your hearts and they want to change the hearts of your children. So it's very important to be cognizant about that as you look at the environment. But I'm also on a radio show that is on every other Friday. I was on there this morning. It used to be with Dr. Bill Meyer, but it's My Faith Radio. And if you're able to tune in, I'd also take questions if you have something or a family member that's that's having a problem or a concern that I can help you with. And lastly, I'm on a syndicated radio program called Our American Stories. And our practice, that's been there for almost 18 years, we have a lot of stories in children whose lives have been saved through the work that mom and dad do. And so I like to share them with people because, you know, it's really the stories that matter. I can tell you all about the theory, But what matters to you is the story. And in fact, I gave a story about an autistic boy who was acting not more than like an animal on the radio. And because of that, I got a family who comes from 4 hours away every month so that I can help mom. And this young man is now sitting and eating and dressing himself. And it's all through how we build each other up, and we support each other and we pray for each other, but also in sharing the knowledge about how God has made children into these wonderful creatures that can be built. Okay, so getting into the meat of the program, or the talk that I have for you, is about what parents are really thinking about. And I want to really talk to the mom who's concerned. You see your kid, and yeah, she or he is okay compared to the other kids, but you have this feeling that things aren't going right, and that this child might not do well when they're adults. And you try to brush that feeling away, and then it keeps on coming back to you, because you're really going towards a goal of having a successful adult. But what is successful? Successful means different things to different people. Maybe somebody wanted to raise a doctor, or wanted to raise a lawyer, or wanted to raise a pastor. But you know, it came down to, when I started really thinking about it, that every mom wants to raise a good man or a good woman that turns out to be a good husband, or a good wife that turns out to be a good mom or a good dad. That's what success really truly was. If they were poor farmers just fighting, you know, every day to make sure that they made a good crop, but they were responsible, they were good people, they loved their neighbors and treated them with kindness, that was a successful adult. And so how do you build that? Brick by brick. We were talking yesterday about how do you eat an elephant, or bite by bite. Well, how do you build a child? Brick by brick. And the problem is that we think today that children are like evolution. It just happened. Children are not like that. You have to lay every brick down, and first goes first you clear the ground, and then you have the foundation, and then you start building the walls, and then you put in the things that go into the walls and all the special effects. But you have to put that foundation, and we're not doing a job deliberately. And a strong foundation right from the start is what ensures that the building will last a lifetime. So throughout history, and this has been noticeable even in our phrases. You know, the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. I don't know that I would take it to that point every day, but you know, that is, being the mom is the most significant job that we have, because we form culture. If we don't like how culture is today, it's because 30, 40 years ago, moms had a different idea of what their identity and their role was. So let's look back and see what anybody would say that Nellie Reagan was a successful mom. And so she raised, obviously, Ronald Reagan and Ronald Reagan's brother. And she was poverty-stricken. And she was married to an alcoholic man, but she loved the Lord. And she gave everything that she could to her church that she belonged to, and she dedicated her time to homeless shelters, to ministering, and she was considered sort of a preachess in her church. So much so that Ronald Reagan brought a group of basketball players to the home, and they were black. And he didn't even notice back then that they were a different color until he reached the doorway and said, well, I don't know, I hope Mom will react okay to that. And she opened the door, and there were these kids, and they all dined and slept in her home. That's a woman with a kind heart. But let me share a story that impressed me about how differently we parent from when Nellie Reagan was a parent. And Ronald Reagan was a very shy boy. They called him Dutch because he had this little round haircut, because they didn't have money for much more than that. And so he was being what we would call today bullied in school. And bullying back then was different from now. I mean, I think you probably really got beat up once in a while. And there were these boys, and they were giving him a hard time, and they wanted to feel very strong in front of this little boy, and so they would come and they would torment him. They tormented him all the way home, and the mom was standing in the front of the home as Ronald Reagan was coming to the home, and she looked at what the scene was, and she looked over at her son and said, Dutch, I'm sorry that these boys are chasing you, but you cannot run away from your problems. So I'm going to go inside. I'm going to let you handle that. You'll be okay. And she walked inside. Oh my goodness. It's not like she didn't have a heart. It's not like the feeling that you have right now over how could she do that to her son wasn't going through her mind. And she walked inside, and I'm sure, this wasn't in the story, but I'm sure she looked out through the kitchen window, make sure that her son was okay. And a few minutes later he came and he knocked on the door and he said everything was fine, and the little boys went away. And guess what? He grew strong. He understood that he had to face the problems and he couldn't run away from them. And so his self-confidence went up. But think about the mind and the hand of a mom that would foresee what her child was supposed to be. Ronald Reagan faced the greatest bullies in the world at the time of his presidency. He knew how to not back down and turn away from what he feared the most. A mom has foresight. A mom looks at her kid and says, I believe that that is what I'm meant for. I'll share with you another story. When I was in 3rd grade, I said, I want to be a pediatrician. And my family comes from a family of educators, so they all looked at me like, what? And where'd you come up with pediatrician? Well, people tried to convince me of something that I should be something else. That's too long. You have to be too dedicated to that. Maybe you're not smart enough. And in the middle of that, my family sent me to Quebec for an exchange program where I had to live there for a year. I come back from Quebec after a year, and I'm signed up for medical school. And I'm looking at my mom like, what? She said, yes, you said that in 3rd grade. I see it in you. And it occurred to me, maybe I'm not cut out to be a doctor, but I'll start and maybe I'll move away and do something else. I started, and I started realizing this is where I'm meant to be. I'm meant to be not only a doctor, but a doctor of children. We see these things as parents. It's an amazing vision that moms can see things. So, this is what we're not doing. This is where we have what do we call them? Snowflakes that melt all the time. We're not building resilient children because we are bearing their burdens. They are not capable as they grow up of bearing the burdens for themselves. And so they go out into the world and they melt. And so what happens is that we're thinking that the values of the good values need to be handed down to them passively, because if we do it more aggressively than that, we're brainwashing them, we're telling them what they need to think, and nothing could be more wrong. But what we're doing is that we are not allowing our model, our values to be imprinted on our children, and they're supposed to learn passively through their experiences, and it eliminates the role of the parent. And so what the child is a mirror of culture. And so the other very important thing that we changed was the relationship destination. When our parents and the parents before them were raising children, they weren't thinking about having a relationship with us. They were secure most of the time in themselves and the relationship with their husband or their mom or their own adult moms, and they had the ideal of something very different. But today, we're raising our children so that they are happy, and they are happy with us. And so that makes it for a negotiation. Like husband and wife, where do you want to go for dinner? And so this conversation now happens between us and our children. What would you like to go? Would you like? And so everything becomes centered on the child. But what happens is that the child gets a message all the time that they are the center of the universe, because they are the center of their universe. And the child has the idea that everything should be centered around them, and that makes them what? Self-serving. Human beings were never made by God to be self-serving. And so the destination that we've had in America since its inception until the 1950s, 1960s was a good citizen destination. We were raising people for tomorrow so that we could leave a better tomorrow than what we have today. And so I really don't like the village concept. Now, I understand where the village concept came from. A child isn't just the product of mom and dad. There are so many factors around. So that if you were a kid being raised in a good town, in a good village, in a good community, you would do even better. But what village is in our new modern world is the conglomerate of the culture, and that's not good because that's faceless. And it really, in essence, what it really takes to start the good building of a child is a good mom and dad, but particularly that mom. And so today, we have a very different environment. All of these factors are raising our children. Sometimes they'll come and they tell us something and we go, huh? Because they're getting influences that you're not really trying to put into them, but they're getting them passively and actively from other places. But this is what they're really being imprinted with. Instead of morality, moral relativism, instead of respecting and revering and honoring women, lack of respect for them. Instead of chastity and abstinence and honoring marriage, early sexual activity. Instead of a focus on kindness and giving to others, focus on self-gratification. So, who's raising our children? Well, in essence, they're not bad people, but they've been devoid of that heart that happens when it's family, when it's real community, because they've been imprinted with the same model as well. They've been imprinted with, well, it's the culture. We shouldn't be forcing the children to learn something. And so they also have the same thought, because that's what they've been imprinted with in school, that we just sort of let the children be the ones to dictate for themselves. So Smart Start teachers and pre-K teachers and college professors, they are the ones that are actually raising the children. And we're just doing a secondary job. I call us glorified babysitters right now. But who's also influencing our children out there and have been given that role? This list is very near and dear to my heart because I work in the middle of the medical community, so I get to see what happens directly and how this is pushed into our homes. And believe me, it's not like we're trying to be evil, but this is the culture in society. And even among Christians, I have Christians that consider themselves, doctors who consider themselves to be Christian in my practice, and they work for me, and it's very hard for me to tell them that they cannot dictate to the parent what they need to do, and that they can influence the parent to understand his or her role in that child's life. And in fact, one of my doctors, when Hannah turned 13, ran into the room after I left and told her, you know, if you need to talk about sex and you need any kind of help with that, you can come to me anytime. Why was that? Because we are told as pediatricians and as doctors that when they turn 13, we need to have that sex talk, and that we need to make sure that we check that box and that child is able to have access to birth control, and that's a medical thing. And so it's all of these influences that are getting to our children before we get to them. And so what does this really mean? One of the most important glues in society was the maternal-child bond. And you know what? That maternal-child bond right now is hanging on by a string. We have to be cognizant of the fact that we have to start building back that maternal-child bond, because otherwise we're going to lose the next generation. I don't think that we can afford to lose one more generation of children. But this started to happen in the 1950s, 1960s after Benjamin Spock. And so it's interesting that the turnaround of where our country was going and how it was strong started with a pediatrician. And then from there, they started thinking about, really, if you want for a nation to be whatever it is, and obviously now it's progressive and humanist, that you get through the heart of the mom to her children, and you break apart that maternal-child bond. And it started a lot with Head Start. And so an important thing that I wanted to leave in your minds, and I talked about this a little bit, is about how parents are graded and what success really means. And in essence, at the end, a successful mom builds a good man or woman by instilling our values and our morality and our faith into our children. And so this path of mine that I talked about at the beginning, because you are a conglomerate of your experiences, came through John Rosemary. He's a family psychologist, and he really made me see. I wondered so much for so long why it was that our children were doing so poorly. And so if you see our families or the way that we're raising children as a solar system, what we have today is child-centered parenting. And what we used to have in the 1950s, 1960s was parent-centered parenting. And so the solar system today is geared around the children. And so we ask the children, what do they want? What do you want to eat? And the child says, I don't want what you cooked today. Oh, what can I make you? Oh, if you're not going to eat that, that's okay. Or well, you're not going to eat anything, and then they come back and they get a snack. Or where are we going on vacation? Oh, we're going to go to Disney World. We used to go visit our aunts and our grandma. It goes on and on and on, and we've created a child-centric. Just go into anybody. It doesn't matter how much money they make, but go into our homes. We have play school homes up the wazoo. We need rooms for our toys, and it's not a good message that we're sending our children. Oh, it's on the same. I thought it was on the next slide. Okay, I'm sorry. And so parent-centric is obviously just the opposite. It's a home that's grounded in, I am here to raise my children, and my children are they have been given to me. You are a steward of your child, and the future of your child depends on who you are and the experiences that you give your child and that the Lord provides for your child. Completely different frame of mind. And then you understand, okay, a vacation is a time to experience together. There should be some kindness and service built into that. When we go out to eat, it should be nutritional. It should be something that builds the body. When I give a child the food, I should be thinking about not what is convenient and the child will not say no to, but what is going to teach that child how to eat properly and how to speak properly, etc., etc. See, completely different framework, different blueprint on how we raise children. So to give you a anecdote, because I think that you get a better feel for things if you have a story behind it, I called this little boy the little general. And so he was brought into me when he was 3 years of age, and he was in a home daycare, and mom was having a conniption with this boy. And mom was this very sort of passive kind of mom, and she was frightened because her child, her male child, and she's a single mom, was anything but passive. This kid was smart, he was manipulative, he could push her around, and he pushed the daycare worker around so much that she called mom up and said, I can't take him not even 1 second longer, because he made the rest of the kids pelt grapes at her. So she brings me this kid, and inside you're sort of laughing because everything stopped in the clinic, and she brings me the little kid and says, "Fix him, because otherwise I'm going to lose my job." And I'm like, "Oh no, it's a very high job that you've given me." But on the other hand, you stop and you look at the reality of it. A 3-year-old, and we have lost our way. I'm sorry. Oh, I thought I sort of told the grape story. He pelted everybody with the grapes. So 50 years ago, it was completely different from what it was today. People are surprised when they see this slide because how could children do these things? And in fact, I'd heard that back in the early 1900s, children didn't almost even have to potty train because, especially in the black community, they would figure out when the little boys and the little girls needed to pee, especially little girls were even better at this, and they would put a little pan underneath them when they needed to pee, and by the time the child was 1 year of age, that they were potty trained. And I'm like, no, that can't happen. Children don't hook up that way. I'm taking it through my pediatrician mind. I said, it doesn't happen that way. You know what? I actually believe it now because things are so different in the experiences and how we're raising our children that I'm pretty sure that neurologically they had been built up to where they were potty trained between probably 9 and 15 months. But we had children sleeping through the night by the time they were 8 weeks of age. They were potty trained 50 years ago. I'm going to be generous about it. 18 to 24 months. Children just didn't co-sleep with parents, and they slept. They didn't wake up and continue to go into the parents' room. That was a no-no. Children didn't have to be entertained at church. There was no entertainment, none needed. And kids went into school. There wasn't a first grade. They didn't know how to read. Maybe mom had taught them some letters and they could put some sounds together, but for the most part they didn't. But they left first grade at the end of the 1 year, and they knew how to read and write and do math better than our third graders do. So I figured that maybe we have different children. Quick story also about how important a mother is, and in case you think that you have to have a husband or dad figure in the house every time, I want to remind you of Dr. Ben Carson. Sonia Carson's, Ben Carson's mom, who passed away, I think, just about 2 years ago, right after he said that he was going to be a candidate for the presidency. Her slogan, or her motto, was "Learn to do your best, and God will do the rest." And that's exactly what she did. She saw that her sons had a purpose, a potential, and she worked on that potential. Her little slogan to the boys was, "You have a brain. God gave you a brain. Use it." So today, by contrast, differently from Sonia Carson and Nellie Reagan, today infants don't sleep through the night until they're over a year of age. Toilet training isn't completed until their kids are walking around in diapers when they're 3 to 4 years of age. And I'm going to tell you real quick, part of the reason that we're doing that is we're leaving them in their comfort zone. Does anything grow in comfort zone? I've heard it said that about growing anything, and the movie about making of wine is that a comfortable grape doesn't yield good wine. Well, a comfortable child does not yield a good adult. We're raising very comfortable children. And so all of the things that we're doing is yielding very comfortable, I don't know that very happy, but comfortable children. And so there's co-sleeping, we have kids' church, they don't know how to read, they don't know how to comprehend what they're reading. And so think about this. What we're doing is we are delaying their development. A kid today that is 7 is probably comparable to a kid back 50 years ago that was 2 or 3. You hear the stories that a 7-year-old will go outside, get the chicken, kill it, break its neck, whatever it had to do, feather it, and maybe help mom make the chicken. And I'm like, 7-year-olds aren't developmentally ready to do that. So how could that happen? Is there a different brain? I always think, back then I was thinking Hannah was 7 or 8. I'm like, that's not happening. Why? Is the brains of our children different? No. We're the ones that have been modeling ourselves to do something that is different. And so we're promoting a delayed development in our children. And so when our children get to school, and now it's earlier and earlier, because it must be that. It can't be that we're not training them the right way. It must be they're not reaching school the right way. And so when they do get to school, or whether it's 4 or 5, they're not prepared to learn. We haven't put the foundation into our children that they need to be able to learn. And so this is what we have now, because of the way that we're delaying their development. Now think of the brain, and the brain needs certain connections, and you're not making the connections happen in time. In fact, you're delaying the connection. Sort of, you have to open up the wall because you didn't put the electrical conduits there on time, so you have to break up a wall. Think about what that does to the walls and the foundation. And so that's how we're raising our children. Oh, I forgot to put this in, and then we have to go back. So because these connections are not being put in properly, well, we have a bad structure. And so it's showing in our children, isn't it? We didn't have mental illness that was prevalent. It was a rare thing when I was a child. We hardly had ADHD. The diagnosis really came up in the 70s. We had 1 in 100,000, I remember this, autism. It was a very, very, very rare thing. What is happening? It's that because of all of these things that are occurring in our environment and in our parenting, we are not promoting healthy adults. So 1 out of 7 of our children have ADHD. 1 of 10 of our kids, when by the time they're older, have been on psych meds. 1 in 10 have been admitted to psych units. Our children, our adult children, have problems with reading and writing and math. And when I was a child, we were number 1 in the world for reading, writing, and our college entry. We're number 22 out of 23 developed nations. And so once again, it's because we're not hooking up those pathways the way that the God's blueprint intended for us to do. And so because we've changed that parenting scheme, now we are allowing the child to tell us, and we're looking for those cues. Oh, he's ready to potty train. He's ready to eat at the table. Instead of understanding that it was God who made it so that these things hook up at a certain time. And so some of the myths that I wanted to bring up to you so that you're thinking about these things is that it's a newfound concept that the child knows what to eat, or when to eat, or when to go to bed, or what is best for him. The children don't know this. That's why when you ask him, when you're at the Chick-fil-A and you ask him, what do you want for lunch? You get this. And then he thinks about it, and he goes back and forth, and he says, nuggets, no chicken tenders, no sandwich, and then you're trying to tell the kid what it is because you've got 5 people back there. The kid doesn't know. And so same thing happens to sleep. We're letting the child pick when his sleep time is and if he's napping or not napping. And the most important thing that we have imprinted on everybody today is that self-esteem is glorious. It's a wonderful thing to tell the child, oh, you're a wonderful kid. And you are, and yeah, he is wonderful. They are wonderful. But they are not perfect, and they are not the center of the universe. And we have really done a bad job for our children in giving them that message. These are the synonyms of self-esteem, so we don't want any of this. What we're looking for is actual self-confidence. And so what happens when we raise a child in self-esteem is he thinks he's in the center of the universe. He thinks mom becomes a vending machine. We know, we felt like one. And so they think that they're the most important person in the world, that the world is there for them to say what they want or what they need. And they're not being mean, they're just being raised to think that that's correct and that's true. And by the time they get to school, they're miserable because they can't sit, they can't eat with the family, the food has to be cut for them, they can't do a thing by themselves. And then their self-confidence goes up here, but their self-image is in here. And when you have that combination, that's terrible for a kid, and they're miserable. And so as they grow up, they don't have respect for adults because they think that they're the most important person. They're not prepared to learn more difficult things at school. They don't receive the lessons on values. They think that if somebody's trying to teach them that is a mean and nasty thing. And then we have the adult, or the adolescent. And so this is where they're really breaking down, and we see this all the time. And so teenagehood is a difficult thing just to start with. I think it was Shakespeare that said if we could cut out the time between 13 and 19, we would have such a better time in society. But I mean, that's difficult already, and then we added to it that we have a schism of their age and their maturity level. And so now we have an 18-year-old who really in their maturity is about 12, if you're lucky, and we're giving them cars and freedom. Oh my goodness, these poor kids. Sometimes I don't know how they make it from day to day, and they're not making it from day to day. We have more suicide than you can actually believe because they have no self-confidence. They're about to go out into the world, and I don't know that I can make it from day to day. And so they're easily depressed. If somebody tells them something that affects their self-esteem, they want to kill them, etc., etc. Hopefully I've made the point of why we are where we are at this point. So the true goal is to raise a self-confident and resilient child. And how do we do that? Once again, like a building. Remember when Jesus said that you destroy this building, you destroy this building, and he gave the reference to a person being a building? A person is a building. You have to build that person. And so I believe that each child has the potential to be a cathedral. And that's why we need to build that child from the ground up. And children that are built from the ground up with self-confidence, with values, with integrity, with difficulty, like Ronald Reagan, those people become people who are problem solvers. They can meet challenges. Those children will become successful, and therefore will create a new generation of successful adults. And that's all through the parent-centric method. So, a little bit about the parent-centric method, just to remind you. It raised the greatest generation of Americans 50, 60, 70 years ago. And they instilled in culture what the American dream was. And that sort of mentality, that blueprint, I like to call it God's blueprint of parenting, had been successful for more than 2,000 years. And we know that because it was in the Bible. Train the child in the way he should go, and when he's grown, he shall not depart from it. This is not just biblical. The writer of Proverbs was not just writing about imprinting on your child biblical views and the love of the Lord. It was, when you do this, then you will get this result in the end. So whatever it was, I mean, if you follow that and you're an atheist, then you will probably get an atheist unless God intervenes and he has pity on that child. But when you train up a child and you put something in the foundation, the child may go away from it for a time, but that is the heart of that child. And so we have forgotten that there is a blueprint, and it's important to put this into the heart of the child. And in the past, moms knew that the childhood was the time to really build that soul and that character. It said we devote so much time into speaking about God and about Jesus to our older people, and that's not wrong. But if we instead of that took 1/10 of the time to go out into the communities and to bring up the children and make them understand the love of the Lord. And that same thing happened to me. I went into a program when I was 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10 that instructed me on the Lord. And my family was they were nominal Christians. But it was that made that real seed happen. And so think about that in your communities and as you're looking to make your changes in the world. And it is time for moms to strike back. And the reason that we have this coin is that this lady means a lot to me. Her name is Elizabeth Steele, and she's from my home state of North Carolina. Elizabeth Steele turned the tide of the Revolutionary War almost all by herself. Nathaniel Greene had just lost some of his most important people that were with him. I think one of the generals in one of the battles. It was raining. It looked like he had lost everything. They were penniless, and he was supposed to stay at this widow's home because she had an inn. So he came in there and he said, "I am lost. I have nothing. I don't even have a friend in this world." And he sat down. And Elizabeth Steele said, "Go on in. I'll be right with you." And she came over to him, and very kindly, just like I imagine it, the way that this picture says, she came over to him and she says, you're incorrect. You have a friend. You have a friend in me. And in fact, she gave him 2 little pouches. One was all of her silver, the other was all of her gold. She said, this is everything I have. I give it to you freely. Put shoes on the soldiers' feet. Put uniforms on our soldiers' backs. And I've been praying for this. We will change the course of this war. You know, Nathaniel Green, he looked like he was wiped out. He gained his strength. He felt so much better, so much more confident that the Lord had placed on him the job of continuing to turn the tide of the Revolutionary War, that in the room where he stayed overnight, he turned the mirror around and he said, King George, put down your head. He knew at that point that King George and America would break their ties, because he had been given that sliver of hope. And nobody understands that that is what a woman does with her relationships. She builds up. So, what is the secret? It's the power of the mom. Moms have to return to our true position, our rightful position as the authority figure in our homes over our children. We have to act and we have to speak as the authority. Have you heard this phrase? Do you want the chicken nuggets? We have to take that out of our vocabulary. No going down and looking at our children like we're cartoon figures. And I'm not talking about being naughty and being haughty and mean, but when a child approaches me, I look at them and I say, young man, I am so glad to see you. And they stand up straight and then they look at me and they say, nice to see you too, Dr. Stein. And that brings up the child and that puts you in your rightful place. And so it's the parent, it's the teacher that makes the decision for the child. And that has a track record for thousands of years. So what happened to my little general? I cannot even count up how much time to the mom. I instructed her, this is what he needs. He needs a strong authority figure mom, not one that lords over him overbearingly, but one that is self-confident, one that says, little Johnny, I'm not going to be changing my mind about that. That's the way it is. And he would maybe push back on her, and he would at some point start to understand mom means business. She doesn't have to yell. She doesn't necessarily have to spank, but she means business and I better do it her way. Or something bad's going to happen and she's not going to threaten me. And so she started slowly to get it. The home started to change, and by about 2 to 3 months, this little guy had turned from the little general to the little private, started understanding his place in life, was able to go back into daycare, and was no longer the troublemaker. And this is him. This was a few years ago, but here's a little sad end to this story, was that he is a very, very intelligent boy. One of the smartest kids. He could see a picture of something and put together Legos that were not necessarily meant to be put together in a certain way and match the picture that he had seen. He would draw out a picture from his mind and put the Legos together in the way that he thought that they should go. Well, guess what? The school thought he had ADHD, or maybe he does. And they wanted him put on medication. The mom, because she was a little too much on the meek side. It's good to be meek and to be kind, but this woman went to the side of being a pushover. And so the school pushed on her and said, you really need to put him on medication. He needs to go to a psychiatrist. He is just not able to control all of this energy. And the mom felt so pushed that she decided to go that route, and therefore Colin is not doing as well as he would have had mom found her voice. Few other important things, because we do have husbands, we do have dads in our family, and you're saying, what am I, chopped liver? And no, dads are not chopped liver. What most important thing is that when you have an intact marriage, you are the supporter of that mom, and you make things for bringing up that child 1,000 times easier. There's so many things that you don't necessarily need to think about as a mom who has a dad in the home, as when you're a single mom. And so that is incredibly important. And that sounding block to be able to talk things back and forth. And he is the CEO, so you're coming back and you're talking about, should we be doing things this way? And the decisions are so much better made. And of course, he's a wonderful role model. It is well known that when dads are not strong dads, or when they're not present dads, that child will have more of a tendency to have high risk. So going back to when there is not an intact family, what do? Here's the thing, that parent, whether it's a mom or the dad, has to assume both roles. And many times the dad has to assume the mom role and has to sort of mirror that mom thing without actually being the mom, which is very difficult. But I have grandfathers that are moms in my practice. I have great-grandmothers that are moms at my practice. That person has to be the person where the buck stops here. And that's what it needs to happen. When you start having a relationship with your child and you're a single mom, it becomes about this and not about making sure that you're doing this. And that is what is so important about impressing on your single moms. Don't make it relational. Make it about building and bringing up your child in love. And so to finish off with the thought of it takes a village, we used to have a village. It was called a community. It was called our neighborhood. And people were looking after each other. And I can tell you a story about a time that I took maybe 10 or 15 extra minutes, and I walked through an area where there were lots of boys. One of them kind of liked me, and I may have tried to have him hold my hand for a moment, and then I got home. And I was only 12 years old. But guess what? My mom was waiting at the door when I got to the house, and this was like half a mile away. This is in New York City. There weren't any cell phones. You're lucky if you could make a phone call and you know everybody's number. Well, my mom was in the front of my home waiting for me and said, "Rosemary, you're with people I don't like." I'm like, where was she? How'd she do that? But you had a community of moms, and they were looking out for each other. But you know why that was? Because you knew that mom, whoever that was, that told my mom, she knew that if I didn't grow up the right way, she was going to influence that other mom, that other child. And then that would lead to a cascade that wouldn't be good for her child. We were all looking out for the future of our children. And so there's a new kind of peer pressure. The peer pressure says we should all have phones, and you feel bad because your child doesn't have a phone or doesn't have the newest tablet or isn't allowed to go to the movies and have a boyfriend when they're 13. And so we're sort of balancing things and saying, so what should I say yes to and what should I say no to? But there used to be that peer pressure that was the ultimate peer pressure. It was a peer pressure of making sure that we got the job done well and making sure that we were protecting the society, the community, the village from our bad job. And moms were seen in the light of that instead of what we're seeing today. I think we're going to add that to the next one. But a very important thing is when our children say things, they're not facts. They have very, very big imagination. And today we're going down the rabbit hole with them, and we think that their thought process is reality. Don't go there. Okay, so my Aunt Peggy was a matriarch of the Fernandez family. My family comes from the Dominican Republic, and they came legally in the 1950s. And my Aunt Peggy was the first one in my family who came over. She was a very interesting story. My Aunt Peggy had decided that she was going to divorce her husband because he was a habitual cheater on her. And so she came back home and told my grandmother that she was going to leave him. And my grandmother said, "Okay, Peggy, you can leave, but you have to get divorced. You have to leave my. You can divorce your husband, but you have to leave my house. And you're not going to live anywhere close to me." This is a mom. I mean, today we would have a conniption. I mean, we might call DSS on the grandmother over the mom today, or the police, whoever we had to call. And I say it was a sort of a very severe mercy at that time. And there's my aunt raising up all the money so that she can come to the United States in the mid-1950s. She came with $250 in her purse. And she found her way, brought back the whole family, including her mom, and thought the world of her mom in the middle of all that. So I have great respect and love for my Aunt Peggy, and I go and visit her every year. She's battled cancer. Last year she was sick again, and I asked her, if I'm given the opportunity to go across the country to talk about the importance of the job of raising children and saving our country through raising our children, what do you think of that, Aunt Peggy? And she said, those are the most important words that we can give Americans today. Moms would give their lives for their children. Not just give their phones for their children, give their lives for their children. And raising children is not for cowards, never has been. We don't back off. We keep on pushing forward, and we don't take one step back. It's a full-time job, and you can even have that full-time job when you have a full-time job. And that is what the real job of moms is to build each child that she's being given stewardship over. And here's my Aunt Peggy when she visited us a couple of years ago. So the conclusion is, God's blueprint does the job. It's the best fertilizer, the best foundation for building our children. It's in the traditional or biblical method of parenting that we can return our children to sanity, to being healthy, to being moral, and to being successful. And we have to reclaim our place in the world by leading the little children. And that's how we're going to save America. I have a book. It's called Who Needs a Village? It's going to be out there if you'd like me to sign it. I'd be very happy to. And I do come around if you have groups, civic groups. I'm happy to come and speak to your groups. And we also do a children's ministry. Hannah is part of that ministry where we have 20 children a year as my program was that I mentioned when I was a child, that we bring out the same sort of spirit to 20 children in the community a year. And so we have different presentations that we give. Train Your Child's Brain, which is really for schools. It Takes a Mother and Not a Village, which is more a historical perspective. And the one that I'm going to share with you later on, which is Curriculum and Child Development, and how it is that the education system is breaking down the successful outcome of our children. So I don't know if, I think that we don't necessarily have time for questions.
We actually do. We have plenty of time.
Oh, look at that.
We've got about 10 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. So if there are any questions or if there are any insights, I'd love to hear from you guys. Oh, okay. So if you liked anything that I said, I'd like you, if you have a phone, I'd like you to take out your cell phone. And because Dave helps me with having an excellent Facebook page, and we look for what we're really trying to impress on people is there's a voice out there that's telling you that there's an expert. There's an expert in everything. There's an expert in hearing. There's an expert in speech. There's an expert in how to feed your child. And it's not you. It's never you. And so what we're trying to impress on you is that the expert doesn't necessarily know any more than you and doesn't have more common sense, ever. And so question, look at it. What we really want for our children is for them to be logical, critically thinking human beings. And so I'm looking to build moms and dads who think critically, and before they jump on something and say, oh yes, that new vaccine, that's the best thing, let's just inject our children with it, without actually thinking, well, does that make sense?
Thank you. Amen.
And I'm not saying necessarily that I'm anti-vaccines, but what I'm saying is, let's think about science. Let's think about how things work. Does this make sense? And so I I want to impress on all of you, think. And if it doesn't make sense, don't do it. Stop right there and go back to the basics, back to the foundation, build up your argument, and if it still works, then you can go forward with it. But my Facebook page, that was a very long thing to say, my Facebook page will imprint time after time in different areas of how we're raising our children, how we're letting experts tell us how we should be doing things, and that's it's completely unfounded. So the Facebook page is Rosemary Stein, MD. If you're kind enough to take your phones out and go ahead and look for my page and like it. It's a public page, but I'd love you, if you're on that, share it, comment on it, tell me what you think. Lots of people from across the country now are asking me advice. We take our time to come back and answer questions to make sure that if that mom has a problem at that time, I feel very compelled to be a helper for that mom at that time. So anyway, after I said all that, so if there are any questions or any comments, as it's a lot to digest because it sort of throws the whole dynamic of raising children upside down. Yes?
So I have a couple actually. So does your book teach specifics on how to retrain the mom? And how long does that take for a mom to become parent-centric versus child-centric?
So the answer to your question is yes. It has a chapter on specifics. The book, what it really does is it brings into a sort of an anecdotal account of how did I come to all of this? What happened in Rosemary Stein's life that she was able to figure all of this out. And so it details that from the time I was little until big. And it also gives practical application, but it gives story after story in how this child and an autistic child and a child with ADHD, a child that had severe medical issues and they were on 4 or 5 medications, how each mom worked it through and put herself in there. And I merely guided, but it was really the mom in the end that was the best medicine that the child needed. And how long does it take? It depends on the child, and it depends on how long this has been going on. I have children when they are autistic and when they have a very severe ADHD or psychiatric conditions, it will take about 2 years to get that child back on track. And each child has a different potential. So I'm not saying that each child will, that I can take a developmentally delayed autistic child and that he's going to learn how to read and perform classical music. But he does have his potential, and we have to figure out what's behavioral and separate it from what's developmental and what is actually physical in that child. And once you start sort of separating those layers and the mom starts figuring, he's manipulating me here, and that's the manipulation, that's the behavior that's leading for him to do these things. So if I take that behavioral aspect away, then I can work on these things, and then his development will mature. And so the answer to your question is sometimes in those cases it'll take about 2 years. In cases where a child is really acting out and doing very poorly in school, but maybe this has happened for about a year or maybe even less, and all of a sudden the grades flop, the kid can't read, he could read before, that'll take probably between 8 and 12 months, and the mom comes back and says, we fixed it. Now it really depends on how much the buy-in that I get from mom. When mom does not buy in and she thinks that just the medication or a referral to a psychiatrist or there's this magic thing that's making the child, or the child truly has a diagnosis and nothing else that's making her child behave that way, then I don't have that buy-in, and she is not going to give all of herself. And it's really about stewardship over the child. And you can't make a child be a perfect creature, but you can surely see that your child has a potential, and a God-given potential has been given to the mom more than anybody else. And when you have that, then you really make that connection, and that mom sees herself in a different position in front of that child.
Is it too late with teenagers?
No, it is not too late. It's probably going to drive you completely bonkers and nuts, and you won't want to do anything with that child. It's going to make you dislike the child very, 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 very much. And in the interim, make the child really dislike you very, 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 very much. And if you persist and you persevere and you pray a lot, it will be okay. But no, it's not too late. It just.
I guess I was thinking along the self-confidence line.
No, I have seen. I had a young girl, and she was 13. She was brought in, and this girl was beautiful, just gorgeous girl, and mom was very pretty as well. And she brought her in because she was just an emotional monster. She ruled over everybody in the home, everybody in the school. She was a tyrant and wanted to get everything her way. And if mom didn't do what she wanted, she would take the knife and start making believe she's. I mean, it was pretty big drama. And it's 2 years later, she is still a even more beautiful to appearance-wise girl, and she's subdued. She still has a lot of those characteristics that she had before, but she submits to her mom. She's a good student. There's no drama at home. Mom tells her to do something, and there's the occasional roll of the eye, but we'll ignore that. And so things are occurring in the home the way that they should. So this is between, I guess, 12, 13, and 15. The later it gets, the more difficult it gets, but it's not impossible. I've had 16 and 17-year-olds. Once again, it depends on the buy-in of the mom, but at that point, it really not only depends on the buy-in of the mom, it depends on the buy-in of the child. And when the child has an interest and a motivation, and you really dig it out of there, then eventually that'll start working.
I have a comment and then a question. I would like to make a suggestion that everybody pay more attention to their mothers and grandmothers and what they say, and not dismiss it as being the old people and being bossy and still my mother.
That is a very, very good suggestion. And in fact, we didn't have much of parenting books until the 1950s, 1960s. There were some that told us, had to get the job done in a very systematic way, but mostly our parenting techniques or blueprint was passed down from generation to generation. And now go to the bookstore and you'll find all of these books that give you all these messages about parenting. So that is great, and we were doing a better job back then.
And the question, child welfare has a lot to do with people's parenting. They have decided they can't discipline their children because child welfare will come and take the children away. There was a wonderful thing that happened during all of the street riots last year where some woman went and grabbed the kid by the ear and hauled him home. And when that happened, it was like suddenly, as parents, we thought we could do something with our children again. I'm not sure grabbing is what, but we can do something. We can discipline. We can be somebody who can do something. Is that really making a change?
That is. Parents are realizing. See, and the thing that happened to that mom is that she didn't care. She didn't care if she was going to go to jail. She didn't care if they were going to lock her up for the rest of the world. My kid is not embarrassing me that way. And she said, and Mike, I did not raise that boy to do that. She did not care. She didn't care if the camera was on her. She didn't care. She could only see the child that has been probably from the time he was an infant and what that kid was doing there. And when moms do that and they don't think about that anymore and they think about the product that they are raising and not what all the environment, what the new peer pressure is going to say about them, then we get back to doing the job correctly, because all we're thinking about is that child's outcome and not about how we're feeling about our job as a parent today.
How do you handle a divorce situation where maybe the one parent wants to make this change, but then they go to visitation with the other parent and it's not like that at all, and dealing with that conflict for the child and helping the child understand that?
Oh wow, and that's a really good common one. And moms will tell me, but I can't do it this way. Yes, but you hold the child accountable to you. You can't hold the child accountable to the father. You hold the child accountable to you. These are my rules. But isn't that the rules at my dad's home? But you're still my child. I hear that you're behaving that way even at your dad's home. You will have me to deal with. Everything with a smile at the end, so it looks like you're in charge. You'll have me to deal with at the end. But he feeds me everything. But you don't have to eat it. Okay. So it comes back to that. Now, it's good for you to have that conversation. We are raising a child that's meant to turn into an adult. And I want you to think about that. And sometimes you don't have that line of communication, and pray and pray and pray that that light will be in there. But when it comes to your child, you need to see yourself as the main authority figure over your child. And tell your child as he's leaving, I love you so much. There is nothing I wouldn't do for you. When you were there, I want you to act like my child, like I've been telling you. Yes, you're daddy's child too, but I want you to act like my child, like you behave at home. Make me proud. Bless him with those words as he goes out, and you greet him back in, and you said, did you behave yourself like mom would want you to? And they'll look at you with this look of fear, like, of course not. And then every time it'll get a little bit better.